Hello and welcome to the first video in our course about economics versus the environment. So this first video is just an introduction. So first question, why have a course about the conflict between economics and the environment? Many schools and universities teach economics and environment as two completely separate subjects. Economics is taught as being mainly about choices we make, about how we use money and resources, and how we can grow wealth and productivity. It's a basic assumption of these courses that growing our economies as fast as we can and becoming as wealthy as we can as communities and maybe as individuals is a good thing.
Environment teaching is focused on the damage that is being done to health, animal diversity, air and water quality, and the cumulative effects of these on situations like the damage to the ozone layer and global warming. It's a basic assumption of these courses that our impact on the environment is almost always bad.
The result is that students who study both economics and the environment can graduate with the idea that our environmental practices have to change, and at the same time that we should maximize economic growth. They never need to look at the fact that most of the environmental damage comes from trying to maximize economic growth. In other words, maximizing economic growth leads to environmental damage. Or putting the same idea another way, protecting the environment leads to a lower rate of economic growth, at least in the short term. Why is there a conflict between economics and the environment? There is a conflict because these two goals of maximizing economic growth and fully protecting the environment cannot both be achieved.
The people who want to maximize growth are willing to live with the environmental damage that is caused. For them, growth is more important. Some of these may be greedy businesses, but it's not as simple as that. Some would argue that it's about feeding the world and improving people's lives. Many of today's 7 billion humans don't get enough food or are very poor. The world population will probably go up to about 8.5 billion. These economists would argue that to have a chance of feeding that many people, we have to have a lot of economic growth. Putting this argument bluntly, what is more important, people or the environment?
Business people often see themselves as solvers of the problems rather than causes of the problem. For example, oil companies wanting to look for oil in deeper and deeper undersea locations describe themselves as helping to solve the world's need for more energy. Then they describe the environmentalists as obstructing their important business. And you can see how the battle lines are drawn.
Another example is genetically modified plants. The makers describe themselves as solving the problems of feeding the growing world population. Supporters of strong economic growth would say, look at the past. Economic growth has always been the best answer to problems. On the pro-environment side, the players see that the facts about what is happening to the environment are very clear, and there's no room for any counter-argument. They describe themselves as fighting to protect the environment for future generations from greedy business interests who are only concerned with short-term profits.
The environmentalists would say that the world already grows enough food to feed the world population. The problem is that it's not shared equally between rich people and poor people, and between rich countries and poor countries. That will be a repeated theme of this course. They would also say that not everything is about money. We also need to consider the quality of life and that environmental damage threatens this. They would point out that a lot of what we measure as economic growth is nothing to do with feeding people or even helping people. It's about extra pleasure and consumer goods for people who are already in a very strong position. As an example, 5G phones. A huge amount of resources and economic effort is going into this, but it doesn't help poor people at all.
So back to the question, why have a course about the conflict between economics and the environment? Hopefully, you can already recognize some of these views. The debate between those opposing views is the subject of this course, and it's not well covered by schools, who, as stated above, tend to teach the two subjects as totally unrelated studies.
As a result, the debate is mostly conducted by politicians or as part of conflicts where businesses and environmental groups fight over things like the destruction of a specific forest. We will look at some of these clashes later. The debate is also very polarized, with each side taking up strong positions and not tolerating any differences of opinion, even among their supporters. We could say that both sides are shouting at each other as loud as they can, but no one is listening. And that's not a debate. So here we have on the left Donald Trump saying, I've removed some of the environmental protection laws so you'll get more economic growth if you vote for me. And on the right, we have Greta Thunberg, who's saying, there's no point in going to school. If we don't fix the planet, there won't be anywhere to live. It's not the purpose of this course to decide in favor of one side or the other. It's fairly obvious that the best course is probably in between, some compromise between the rival goals of maximum growth and 100% environmental protection. As a result, some of the views expressed in this course will be controversial and not supported by either side. So a little bit about the outline of the course structure. This video and the structure of the course is built around three main components. Firstly, the environmental side of the debate, which is part one, then the economic side of the debate, which is part two, and then we'll look at some of the areas of conflict, which is part three. And this is the end, my friend. See you next time.